Greetings everyone. Like I said at the last part of my previous video, this was originally supposed to be the second part of that one, but I chose to split it and put it here as a separate entity, because like I said, I myself don't like very long videos, and and 30 minutes is already long enough. So in this one I'm going to be talking about raid bosses, I believe, and skill points and skills and gear synergies that don't really work the way Gearbox intended them to. So with that, I'm going to cut back to the original portion that I had recorded earlier.
So, the reason I am here in 1000 Cuts is because I wanted to talk about raid bosses. For the longest time in Borderlands 1's life cycle, the game had a pretty clear message. It was, like I said, a fun aim and a new, unique take on the first-person shooter genre by combining it with RPG-style skills and loot systems. And the way that transitioned over into kind of like unique guns, and the way they synergized with certain skills on certain characters. So that was like one aspect of the game, and the second part was, of course, emphasizing as much as to the best of that game's ability the emphasis on multiplayer play, and actually how the game would be much more fun if you play it with friends online, or even in split screen, whatever. And for the longest time that was the case. The only thing you could do in Borderlands was clear missions with your friends. Maybe if you had already cleared all the missions, you would like just hop back into a map and kill stuff and hope you get some sort of unique drop. And there was never anything particularly challenging. Borderlands was never about doing things the hard way. It was all about just simply enjoying yourself. And the game was kind of like making you feel like you're strong automatically by making things relatively easy for you, where there was nothing too crushing or too challenging about the game's requirements. But all of that, of course, changed with General Knox DLC, where they wanted to breathe some fresh air and some new blood into the game, with, of course, the introduction of pearlescent weapons, more levels, and, of course, Cromerax the Invincible. Despite all my problems with raid boss concept and design, I still regard Cromerax as kind of a good addition to the game and a success in a way. But mainly because I was willing to give Gearbox a pass and concentrate more on what they did right with Cromerax than concentrate on their shortcomings. Cromerax was right off the bat kind of like advertised and emphasized to be a boss that you were much better off killing in a group with your friends. So it was kind of emphasizing the strongest point of Borderlands formula, which is multiplayer. And it is, of course, the most fun thing about the game to experience. The game is, of course, much more fun when you're playing it with someone else, especially if it's someone you know. Randoms are not very fun to be around most of the time. And it had a kind of like unique twist to it, where it only took damage from critical hits and regular hits would do nothing. And so, like, initially when you spawn into the arena and he just like emerges from the ground and you see Cromerax the Invincible and you start shooting him and he actually takes no damage, you're like, holy crap, what am I supposed to do now? And then you realize that he only takes damage from crits and so on and so forth. And the loot drop from him, even though he generally dropped only one pearlescent, the loot he dropped was pretty significant in number and quality. That if you killed him in a group with 3 other people, you wouldn't really, you could probably like fight over the pearlescent if it was actually good, But generally nobody would feel left out because the loot pool would be sizable enough for everybody to get a piece. But there was still, of course, the issue of the notorious ledge, where you could get catapulted up and you would be immune from all of his attacks, and that's something I'm going to elaborate further on in a minute. Despite the heavy emphasis on, like I said, multiplayer, it was super possible to kill Cormorak solo, but that took people like a little bit of time to get used to. But once they actually realized that it's possible to kill Cormorak solo, of course that spawned a whole community of like speed kills and creative builds to kill Cormoraks with, and so on and so forth. But still, most people, I believe, used the ledge glitch. I never got it to to work very well for me consistently. I killed Cormoraks, I believe, 3 times. That's only because I played Borderlands 1 after Borderlands 2, and I killed them in like the legit method. I used Mordecai and I used snipers with ammo regen cons and pistols. So yeah, while I consider Cormoraks to be a success, like I said, because I'm going to give Gearbox like a pass because it was like their first attempt at the concept, same cannot be said for Borderlands 2, starting with, of course, our friend here, Terramorphous, the Invincible. Sorry, my mic died up on me like it usually loves to do, so I have to like re-record this small portion and like splice the other parts together. What I wanted to say is, same cannot be said for our friend Terramorphous here. While I consider Cormoraks to be a good example of a raid boss, at least like a beta version of what raid boss concept is, Terramorphous is really a failure in terms of following up on that idea. Because Terramorphous emphasized all the bad things about raid bossing instead of the good things. First of all, the legitimate method, which is kind of like presented to you, where you immediately notice that you can fall off the edge here, and so you notice these 2 rocks, which are kind of reminiscent of the rocks you find in Cormorak's lair, and you come to the conclusion like, oh yeah, these guys want me to like bob and weave and like hide from this guy's attacks and play a game of like cat and mouse with him. But that is really not the best way of killing Cormoraks at all, and when I say best, I don't just mean easiest or quickest. Second part is the loot pool, and I did grab a few items from it, is not really that big. And if you come here in a group, aside from the point that you can make the fight slightly easier only because you can like slag him more consistently, you would end up like kind of coming out of the fight empty-handed because there's not enough loot to go around. So I don't think that killing Terramorphous in a group is that much of an emphasis or that much of an important like aspect. Again, you find that killing him solo legitimately isn't really the best course of action at all, because if you are something like me and you tried it multiple times and you just got your ass kicked, and you finally gave in to the dark side and like researched it on the internet, and you finally realized that there is something in the game called the B-Shield, and at the time the conference call was still not patched and you could just melt him in seconds, you kind of like realized, why the hell am I making my life difficult here and doing things in a way that's not anymore clear to me whether or not the developers wanted me to do. And furthermore, there was no puzzle to Terramorphous at all. He just pops out of the ground, stays there for several seconds, and he's just this huge, large health pool that you have to melt. There isn't anything specific. You don't need to like hit crits. You can completely kill him with body shots just fine, so there was no mystery to it. So Terramorphous here, and of course you still have a ledge, but you don't have to work at all to get to it. It's just there. And so, what is Terramorphous? Like, what does killing Terramorphous mean? It kind of means nothing. It just means that you got a B shield, hid behind a ledge, and melted something with an OP gun. Nothing impressive about it. And you could go as far as say that even in the base game, Terramorphous didn't give you much of a reason to kill him. Maybe the blood of Terramorphous is the only thing worth it, but everybody knew, I believe right from the start, that proficiency relics and like things that improve cooldown on most characters were the best thing to do. And killing Terramorphous to get a blood of Terramorphous was no fun at all. He's very stingy with his loot pool. Oh, actually no, you do have one single reason, which is the hide of Terramorphous. But getting it was extremely difficult. So you find this boss, and if you don't care about roid shields, and you're really much more content with a proficiency relic, you had absolutely no reason to kill Terramorphous. So what is this about? I'd say it's a complete failure. And going on, if you stick to the main game, you have Vermi, which you could go the entirety of Borderlands 2 without ever realizing he exists. And he actually has a very good reason for you to kill him, because he gives you, of course, the legendary Hunter and other legendary comms. He gives you the Norfleet, which is the strongest rocket launcher in the base game. I believe, no, actually in the entirety of Borderlands 2. And the hardest part about killing Vermi is getting him to spawn. So there is an emphasis on multiplayer, but in the wrong way, because it's like required to get him to spawn. And the fight itself is stupidly ridiculous. There is no trick, nothing to it. So Borderlands 2, in its base game, took raid bosses in a completely wrong direction, I'd say. And things did not improve very well with the DLCs. So, with the DLCs, the raid boss formula took on a kind of like new face, new identity. Our first example from the DLCs is, of course, Hyperius, found here in the Washburn refinery. And again, with Hyperius, you'd find that while they did kind of like restore a little bit of the mentality of having the raid boss fight be a little bit of a puzzle, that there's some sort of like unique mechanic to it, unlike Terramorphous, which again is just this huge health pool that you have to melt as quickly as possible. In the case of Hyperius, it actually had more girth to it. Like there is some sort of like unique mechanic you have to figure out of him and the bots and the way they like shield him, and you have to damage them in order to get the shield off of him, and so on and so forth. But again, the worst parts about raid bossing were still there. You still had really very little reason to go in with a group. The loot pool wasn't big enough. With Hyperius, you had a clear reason to like keep killing him because of the Seraph crystals. But the loot specific to him isn't. I don't believe the bosses in this DLC had specific loot. I believe everything was purchasable with Seraph crystals. But even if there were, like the unique weapons of the first campaign DLC were far superior to the Seraph weapons introduced. So again, with Hyperius, you were, of course, if you're playing Zero, you're far better off using Boar. I might go ahead and splice in one of my kills, just to save time, because it was really quick and wouldn't increase the length of this video specifically. But again, the issue with Hyperius is he kept emphasizing the wrong things. You had that pipe you could hide behind. You were not... nobody killed him the quote-unquote legitimate way. Everybody either bored him or did something extremely OP and clearly not intended, be it TDO reloads with Axton or whatever it is you did with the other characters. So again, what were we doing? What was raid bossing about? It felt like this kind of tradition that they felt they had to uphold, but they kept stumbling and not realizing the potential what they were supposed to do with this raid boss thing that they just invented. And again, like, what is it? Is it something difficult? Is it difficulty? I don't think I can classify it as difficult. It was either a testament of how well you know the glitches and exploits of Borderlands, or how long you're willing to endure if we're talking about the Master Gi, which I touched clearly upon when I talked about challenges. And the trend continued. Like, with Master Gi you could crush him with a gate, so glitch exploit. With Hyperius you could bore him, and I'm sure every other character had a cheap way of killing him. Terramorphous you could just melt. Continuing on to Pyro Pete, easiest raid boss in the game. You can jump on the ledge, you can do a grenade jump, you could do whatever. None of the raid bosses kind of like rewarded you for playing fair. They were just again, like a testament of how well you know the glitches and how well you farmed for gear. They weren't a testament to how well you were playing. Emphasis on multiplayer play was not very good. Loot pools were generally not big enough, and the raid boss gave you oftentimes very little reason to keep killing him. And that got capitalized, of course, in Hammerblock's DLC with the monstrosity that is Voracitus. I believe even with him you still had an exploit where you could like go underneath the arena, but I don't know if that still worked in the latest patches or whatever. And fighting him was an absolute nightmare. Nobody aside from Salvador had an easy time fighting this stupid thing. You always had to rely on, in the case of Zero here, I used the like decoy in the wall. You could pre-stack critical ascension, and going in with a group did not help. So again, what the hell had raid bossing become? We went from the days of Chromarax, where because it's Borderlands 1, we were excited about it, and it was this new, unique trend where you have these invincibles, which are supposed to be difficult tasks in a game that never really tried to be difficult. And we went all the way over to Voracitus here, which is an absolute nightmare and almost the worst and hardest boss of, maybe not the worst, but absolute hardest boss in Borderlands 2 to kill, and for the wrong reasons. Like, the game doesn't really give you enough of room to wiggle around with him. You pretty much had to use Moxie weapons to heal in between his Novas, and it's really unclear what they want you to do. Again, like, yeah, it's some sort of a puzzle. It's not a flat-out, like, huge loot pool like the base game of Terramorphous and Vermivorous, but it wasn't a good experience. And you kind of like had to kill him to get the interfacer, but it wasn't a very good direction for the game to go. Things finally started getting better with, of course, the Dragon Keep DLC, because in Borderlands 2 it houses the boss that I like the most amongst the raid bosses, which is of course the dragons. And the dragons really emphasize what's good about raid bossing. The dragons are a puzzle. You have to figure what each and every one of the dragons does, the order you kill them in. Didn't really like the way that you have to kind of like ground them with non-elemental damage. I would never have figured that out on my own in order to get them to avoid like resisting damage once they do land. But if you fight them in a group, you're actually rewarded. The fight is much easier when you fight them in a group. The loot pool at the end is significant enough, and you get a huge room full of chests where each one of you can drop a little iridium, and you get a huge reward. So yeah, things finally started to improve with the dragons. But after what? After we had already gone through Terramorphous, Vermivirus, Pyrorepeat, Voracid, and of course don't even get me started on Dexy, because he's a very good contender for the absolute worst raid boss in Borderlands 2. And so things finally got better with the dragons here, and I'm glad they did, because after that we did get a nod to an homage to Chromarax in the form of course, the son of Chromarax, which cannot be considered a bad fight, even though I still say that it's kind of like not too big on the puzzle side, and he's also some kind of like a huge health pool that you have to melt. But at least the fight isn't difficult, and it's kind of like rewarding. And for a long time, I believe I'm not missing anybody, we thought that that was it. Until, of course, well, people consider the raid on Destruct to be like the raid of mobbing. And we got, of course, Haderax, which again, I don't consider to be bad per se, because the game like kind of clearly gives you specific gear in order to kill him with, and the reward is good. So in a way, I want to say that raid bossing thankfully improved, and that's kind of like why I'm very optimistic going forward to Borderlands 3. But for the longest time of the game's cycle, we were stuck melting Terramorphous with bees, struggling to get Vermi to spawn, boring Hyperius, crushing stupid Master Gi with the gate, laughing at how easy and numerous exploitive ways you could kill Pyrorepeat with, and grinding our teeth in frustration at Dexy and Voracidus. So that was certainly no fun at all. But gladly things did improve. As I said, the dragons are pretty good. Our friend Haderax here is relatively pleasant. Son of Chromarax is actually good, and TPS actually has good raid bosses for my taste. So yeah, that was my point on raid bosses. So my final point for this episode, should I say, is the amount of super dumb design flaws that were clearly present in Borderlands right from the beginning that Gearbox development team never addressed. It was so frustrating reading the patch notes and the update notes for Borderlands 2 and seeing how out of touch Gearbox Software were with their own game. To start off, if you check out Zero's skill tree here, you have very clear examples of, again, Gearbox not understanding their own game. For example, if you wanted to pick out of these two skills in Zero's sniping tree, nobody, I believe, ever would go for optics. Aim steadiness is definitely nice, but unless it completely eliminates it, there is no difference, because you're not going to land your critical hit if your zoom is or if your aim is just like wonky like this. And it doesn't matter how wonky it is. It doesn't matter if it goes all the way over here or if it goes just slightly to the right. You're not going to get your critical hit. So it helps, but very little. It is much better for me to get more out of my critical hit when I do land it, so nobody's going to go for optics. These are actually nice. Then you come to velocity, which the main gain here is bullet speed, and you might think this is fantastic until you realize that the best guns in the game, like the Pimpernel, are actually hurt by having more velocity. So you had a skill that again shoots you in the foot. Kill confirmed is also kind of bad because you had to keep aiming down the sights. You could actually get this to work and benefit you when you're killing the dragons, but it's not the best example. L1 with the gun most people like, and Critical Ascension gave you these extremely fragile stacks
that you would never get to work unless you do an exploit of like pre-stacking critical ascension with a low damage sniper rifle, which everyone who's played Borderlands on LP8-0 knows. This method was popularized for very good reason, because it's super effective, and many raid boss kills were actually reliant on pre-stacking critical ascension. You could actually get this to work against Foracitus in an exploit that was popularized by, I believe he invented it, Man of Low Moral Fiber, which is of course a legendary Zero YouTuber. So a lot of bad design was present in skill trees, and this is not only present in Zero's case, but actually with many other characters. Almost every single one had stinker skills that you would never spec for. Actually, this middle tree is the one that has the least amount of bad skills. This sucked for a whole long time until they patched it. You have this, which again shoots you in the foot because it gives you more maximum health, and the melee damage it gives you is actually additive, which is far less effective than multiplicative, which things like this are. And I'm not going to go into the difference between those two. I'm sure you know what that is by now. This would actually hurt you if you're playing melee, because it regenerates your shield after each kill, and if you wanted to get Many Must Fall, even if you don't want to get Many Must Fall, you want your shield to stay depleted. So this again is a skill that is in a very weird place, and it hurts your playstyle. This is useless because it never gives you enough health. This is useless because it's additive, and you have to spec into it to avoid this and this, so you're wasting skill points there. This is useless because it gives you very negligible additive skills, and it's actually a tier 5 skill. And this is of course the capstone, which is very useful, but not if you're fighting something like a raid boss at all. So in his design you have a lot of skills that are very bad, some of which are completely outclassed by others and you have no reason to spec into them, and some of them actually end up hurting you. In fact, in Zero's case, even his action skill is bugged, where the critical hit damage listed up to plus 250% is actually not working. This only works if you toss something like a Deliverance and have it shoot things while you're still in Deception. But canceling out of Deception or coming out of Deception with a shot disables that bonus before the shot ever reaches your enemy, no matter how close your enemy was. And these problems were present in the game right from the start. And what Gearbox did when they patched stuff is, again, a testament to how out of touch they were. They obsessed over the 80% bonus given here by Deathmark, and they nerfed this on multiple occasions. For a very long time, Maya's Cloud Kill was an example of the worst game changer skill in the entire game, where the damage it gave you was absolutely horrible. Axton had nothing super major besides TDO reloads and grenades, and most of his skills were kind of bad. And all this time, Salvador had a very OP package of skills where he could just like gunsirk all the time and have money shot activate non-stop, and they never addressed that. Maya had a glitch with where she could activate that whatever fight for your life bonus that she gets even if she's alive. They tried patching that 3 times and it didn't work. 3 times! They couldn't patch it. It was still present in the game. And they left stuff like this, and they actually tried to nerf Deathmark without ever touching Salvador. Even Salvador, who's considered the strongest, has a lot of horrible skills that nobody specs into. So the design of these skill trees was very bad. Even the latest Vault Hunter that they released, which is Krieg, has a lot of questionable stuff. And the same applies to him. Same with Gage. So what were they doing? What was this? Why were they so unable to understand how their game functions? Why was it that the community understood Borderlands and its skills much better than the developers? And like again, Zero's Critical Ascension, the only viable way to use it was to exploit it, to pre-stack it, because going into your backpack removed your stacks. Climbing a ladder removed your stacks. So how are you supposed to maintain stacks throughout a level? It was impossible. Maya's Cloud Kill got patched, and it went from being the most underwhelming and worst skill to being such an impossibly overpowered thing that allowed you to run entire maps with just a basic level 1 repeater because of how strong it was. Again, Zombie Maya was patched multiple times, didn't work. Salvador was never touched. And because of that, you'd find that on the forums that were discussing Borderlands was treated by a lot of the people that were playing it as if it were like a fighting game. The same discussions that you would find surrounding games like Tekken and character tier lists and whatever was applied to Borderlands because people felt wronged. Why is it that my Zero is getting like squished each time he goes in to fight Veracitus, whereas Salvador can just like melt him without even thinking? Why is it that Maya gets her cloud kill that just obliterates everything, and people who are playing alongside her in the party just cannot get a single kill and get their kill skills going, which for Zero is not a very big deal, but for someone like Axton it's a nightmare? Why is it that, for example, Zero's critical ascension is so hard to utilize? Why is it that his Many Must Fall is very hard to utilize? Why is it that he has skills that contradict themselves? Whereas, for example, Krieg, and maybe this is kind of like debatable, but Krieg had a kind of like an easier time if you were willing to deal with RNG when it comes to melee. You had stuff that contradicts themselves. Again, you had this thing with Krieg where it significantly increases his melee damage, but it has this weird relationship with guns that have blades on them, where if you don't have a melee shield, you were far better not using the melee attachment, but if you were using a melee shield, the melee attachment actually becomes superior once again. So all of this was very confusing. It was very hard to decipher, and why were these things so vague and wrong and not patched is beyond me. This extends to other stuff besides skills. For example, assault rifles were overall considered by the community, and rightfully so, the most inferior weapon class in the entire game. You had this rarity, which is the E-Tech rarity, which was supposed to be the next best thing to legendary, and it is very bad. The critical hit modifier on them is very bad. They consume way too much ammo for what they do. And actually the sniper rifle versions of these are incapable of critical hitting Pete, which was demonstrated by the Man of Low Moral Fiber. And this carried to a lot of things. You got legendary guns that were worse than their purple counterparts. For example, like in the case of Maliwan here, the legendary Maliwan Volcano was actually inferior on 90% of the characters, all characters but Axton, I believe, to just a regular Maliwan Snider. How come? The Volcano is much more difficult to get. Well, you could argue that it's not, because you can never guarantee where you could get a super good Snider. That's going to tie to the point I'm going to make in my next video, which concerns farming. But there were a lot of mistakes when it comes to Borderlands design. Grenades, shields, you name it. Everything had clear signs of, like I said, stuff that they designed on paper as like a general rule to apply to everything, but while they were introducing new stuff to the game, they did not revisit their old decisions, and that led to a lot of weird and bad instances of guns that were supposed to be awesome but turned out to be trash because, like I said, the effects didn't work correctly, or the developers didn't understand what makes a gun good, so they made guns that were completely sucky. You had fantastic weapons that overshadowed everything else, just like the Sandhawk here. Nobody had a reason to use an Emperor. You had very, very, very bad things all around when it comes to gear, when it comes to skills. And these are the things that Borderlands is all about. Borderlands is all about finding gear and skills combinations and using those to experience first-person shooters in a completely different, new, and unique way. And it is for that reason that I firmly believe that the absolute best way to experience Borderlands 2 comes not from Gearbox, it comes from the modding community. And with that, I am of course referring to the unofficial community patch, which thankfully, from what I gather, Gearbox actually adopted in a way. They allowed discussions regarding the unofficial community patch to be conducted on their forums. And the reason they were reluctant was because before that, the modding community was actually giving the game kind of like a bad reputation. They were making clearly overpowered weapons that people could join your game and use, and this has been discussed to death by other YouTubers. But Gearbox's solution to that was to just eliminate modding altogether from the game. And thankfully that did not work. People found a way to mod the game despite of Gearbox, and they finally did not fight it. They just allowed it to happen because it really made the game superior. The unofficial community patch, which I am so sad not to have access to on my console here, is the absolute best way to experience Borderlands 2 because it does not contain the problems that the Gearbox version of Borderlands 2, even in its latest patch, has. And the state of, like I said, disconnection they have with their own game, this is actually very present in the effervescent weapons that you get, a lot of which are completely stupid. You have this thing that gives you more health on Digistruct Peak, and in my next video I'm going to again highlight why it is an absolutely horrible idea to have more health when you're running Digistruct Peak. So they don't understand what makes their game work. What mechanics are not just like meta and exploitative, but the only mechanics that actually do work in their game. So I hope that, because I don't think that, I cannot guarantee that modding is going to be a thing with Borderlands 3, I'm very concerned when it comes to stuff like this. And the reason I am slightly optimistic is because, as I'm going to discuss in a separate video, the pre-sequel actually did this whole skill tree thing much better. Much better. It was 10 times better than Borderlands 2, and it's kind of like one of the reasons why I think the pre-sequel is criminally underrated by the Borderlands community. But that's not enough ranting for this video. I'm going to see you in the next one, which will kind of be like the final one when it comes to like discussing Borderlands itself. But it might be the most important, because this is where all the stuff that I discussed so far kind of like converges into the real nail in the coffin when it comes to enjoying Borderlands 2. And so until then, well, goodbye and see you all next time.